To create a feather bunch, choose multiple feathers. As with these feathers, and especially with drabs, the hair may appear spiky. Curling the hairs will give them a softer, more flowing look. For curling your feathers, use a pair of dull scissors. Paper scissors work well. Curl the hairs on each individual feather before layering. Using your thumb and the blade of your scissors, gently pull down small groups of hairs to curl as if curling ribbon for a package. Be careful not to squeeze too tightly as it will cut the hairs, but hold firmly enough to get a lovely curl. If you happen to cut off a few hairs in curling, that's okay. Having multiple plumes together will hide these little mistakes. Work your way down the length of your feather and back up the other side. If you miss a few hairs, go back and recurl them. Curl all of your feathers before moving on to the next step.
So I've switched to black feathers and white thread just so you can see what I'm doing better. But for your feather bunch, you're going to want the thread to match the stem of the feathers as closely as possible. So I've tied a knot at the end of my thread, and I am going to put my needle through the knot to make a loop, and then place that loop over the stems of my feathers and tighten that up. So then holding your feathers towards the end of the feathers, you're going to hold all of the stems together. You're going to go down on one side of the stems and then come up on the opposite side. You can flip your feathers over to make sure you've gotten all those stems, because sometimes towards the end one likes to go wonky and it gets out of the bunch. You're going to make sure your needle is on the inside of the thread and pull it tight. These stitches don't have to be really close together. Usually mine are about 3/4 of an inch apart. And your next stitch is going to go down on one side of the feather stem, come back up on the opposite side, make sure your needle is on the inside of the thread, and tighten it up. And you're going to keep doing this all the way down the stem of your feathers. Stop. So now that I've sewn my stitches all the way down the center stem of the feather, I've got some thread left. So what I'm going to do is to take the needle and just where I've sewn these little knots all along the center stem, I'm going to pull my thread back through so it will stay together and you don't have to tie any additional knots, and you're not going to have any tails of thread hanging off. So then, well, I've got a magnetized pin there. Then you trim that off close to the feather and then turn it over. So where we've done each of our little knots on the inside, we can see we have a stitch on the outside stem of the feathers. And that's why we want to use a thread that's close to the stem color. At this point, you want to look at each section, and if you've caught any hairs and pulled them up toward the end of the feather instead of them going out, you can take your needle and pull those out to make sure everything is laying nicely. Sometimes you get some little loops in there. This one actually did pretty nicely. Got some issues up here.
After curling the hairs on your feathers and sewing them together, you may want to curl them to get a nice rounded end. I like to use a large barrel curling iron for this step. After heating your curling iron, curl the end of your feather bunch to give it a nice, soft look. To create an almost pom-pom effect like seen here on this 1819 fashion plate from the Monthly Museum, curl all the way up the stem of your feather. If the bunch becomes too tight, adjust the curl with your hand by bending the stem.